Okay. Okay. You may now go and tell us what you want me to do, and I will do it for you.
Okay. Well, first, thank you so much, everyone, for giving your evening. We have 118 participants right now. That's so wonderful. I enjoy seeing all your faces, and I especially enjoy seeing the faces of my friends from Bellingham and Portland and Seattle and Berkeley and Honolulu. And thank you for being here, everybody. What the friends that I'm mentioning are people who have heard this lecture about 150 times and could give it themselves, but here they are again joining us. So how terrific. I also want to apologize for the setting. I hope you do see this lovely view behind here. I've never given a Zoom talk from this room. It's actually in the Princeville Community Center that I needed to rent all of a sudden today. And there's quite an echo in this room. And also the fluorescent lights are yellow. So I wanted to assure you that my liver is just fine. I haven't, in case you think, why is that jaundiced looking lady echoing? Please forgive it, because that's the foible of this room, not having rehearsed in this space before. So welcome everyone so much. I'm thrilled with your interest in the Laysan Albatross. As you'll probably already know and will learn, they are superlative by every measure. They're absolutely extraordinary animals among us. So, and I have had the opportunity to be studying them as a citizen scientist really for about the last 15 years. And every single time I go to the rural colonies that I monitor, I learn something new. So I'm going to try to squeeze that all into our short hour together. And I also want this to be a conversation. I get very bored if it's just me talking. So anytime you have a comment or a question, please put it into the chat and I will notice it. And while I'm talking, if a question pops up, I will answer it quickly after you put it in, so we don't have to save it for the end. So please do that. And I would like to start with a little film that I produced in 2018. It's a film called Kalama's Journey, and it's a story of an albatross chick who grows up here on Kauai. And it's about 8 minutes long, so we're gonna watch that now. Hopefully the video doesn't snag any for us and we can watch it smoothly. So here we go, Kalama's Journey.
Laysan Albatross. Everything about them is extraordinary. In the Hawaiian language, they are known as Moli and are considered sacred. They navigate huge distances, sometimes flying for days over the seas without a single wing beat. On land, they dance for years before they choose a mate. Then their love for each other lasts a lifetime, which could be 60 years or more, longer than any other wild bird. They only need solid ground to raise a family. Fledglings aren't taught how to fish or fly. When they're ready to take flight for the first time, they'll have to figure it out for themselves. Midway Atoll, a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, is the mothership of these albatross, the place where most Moli come from. But Midway is also a sinking ship and is destined to be submerged as sea levels rise in the coming decades. So where will these millions of birds go? The Hawaiian island of Kauai is the one place on Earth where Moli have chosen to nest among humans, and it may be one of their only hopes for survival.
To me, they are so important. They are so important to our culture. We hold birds in very high regard. Some of the most prized gifts that you can give someone, most prized awards, are feather leis, feather kahili, things that symbolize very high achievement.
This is a story about one chick named Kalama. In Hawaiian, Kalama means the light from a flame or enlightenment. Kalama's biological parents nested too close to a Navy runway. Because of fear that the birds might collide with airplanes, the eggs are carefully taken from parents who are at risk and then driven to safe nesting spots on the other side of the island, where they are given to parents whose eggs are known to be infertile. Kalama's egg is placed in a nest with two mothers. Female nesting pairs are not uncommon amongst Moli. These mothers accept their new baby without the slightest hesitation, and they dote on her from the moment she hatches. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology sets up a live streaming camera for the season, so people from all over the globe can watch Kalama hatch and grow. She quickly steals the hearts of more than 1 million viewers around the world.
I'm very happy today, especially, to be here in the district of Ko'olau. I'm here with some of the members of our halau to experience this special place and to visit one of the protected colonies of Moli. We were invited to name the newly hatched chicks or baby Moli.
It's a great privilege to watch them up close here today, and it's been very entertaining just sitting here and being quiet and reflective and watching the little ones do their own little things and their own quirks.
The albatross that fly across the sky remind me of the canoe that sails across the ocean.
It was such a great privilege and opportunity to be here, knowing that we're able to engage and name Moli.
It was the personal experience that I saw these birds display amongst themselves, but more importantly is what it did for me. I don't know if anyone can even understand what I'm saying, because I witnessed that today and looking at the Moli that we had an awesome experience to kind of take a look at.
Baby Moli face many risks, including predators like dogs, cats, and pigs. And there's never a guarantee that their parents will survive at sea and return to feed them. Kalama is fortunate. With high-octane meals from her moms, she begins to strengthen her wings. The older she gets, the stronger she gets, and the less she sees of her parents. They spend more and more time foraging at sea just to find enough food for their baby. They fly all over the North Pacific, from British Columbia to Alaska to Japan. Soon it will be Kalama's turn to take the same journey, although no one has shown her how to fly. Why does one baby bird matter so much? It's because these magnificent birds are facing the biggest threat their species has ever known. Global sea levels are rising. When the nesting grounds at Midway Atoll are submerged, millions of Moli will be left without a home. Kauai is safe for 3 reasons. It has elevated bluffs. There are no mongoose that plague the rest of Hawaii. And it has people who care. Kauai could be their Noah's Ark.
And maybe what the Moli is doing is actually talking to us, teaching us, inspiring us of what this place is. That out of all the places that they could choose, maybe it's reminding us how special this place is and reminding us that we need to care for it.
The time has come for Kalama to leave her beautiful island. Even though no one has taught her how to fly, and she has only one chance to get it right. Once she flies, her feet won't touch ground again for several years. If she's successful, She will return home to the very place where she hatched, to start her own family, and hopefully will lead more Moli back to Kauai. Kalama's journey is just beginning.
Thank you. Patty or Sharon, if you would put the link to the Vimeo link to this film. So
Okay.
people, in this
Sharon,
case,
you can do it, please, if you will.
I'm sorry?
Okay, all right. Charlotte, what's your question?
Yes, I'd like to know, is it on Midway and Kauai the only places where that bird nests?
Primarily, there are some other northwestern Hawaiian islands where they nest, the French Frigate Shoals, Tern Island, places like that. And there's an island called Laysan. They nest there as well. But the big majority of them, I think something like 85% of them nest at Midway.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and let's see. Mahola. Okay, all right. Are you ready for me to show your slides?
Yeah, if you would just though put a link to the Vimeo in the chat for people to see later. It's snagged several times during this, and somehow it seems to have to do with the number of people that we have. I'm not sure.
Hob, I'm getting that information. I'll put it up in a minute or two.
Okay, yeah, no rush. Just before we're ending.
Okay.
119. Those are some of my favorite numbers. That's great. 119 of us. So yeah, we can go to the slides.
Okay, all right. So we're going, hang on. Can you see them?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So I always like to begin my presentations with a big mahalo, a big thank you to Carl Safina, who wrote the book Eye of the Albatross and many other books. Eye of the Albatross is what originally stimulated me to get to know more about these birds. And Carl was here several years ago as a faculty for a Hanalei Writers Retreat. And while he was here in Hanalei, did what it does to people and made them, their hearts burst open, and he proposed to his girlfriend and they got married. So that's the reception right there.
I didn't mean to change it. Sorry.
And that was their daughter running behind them. So Midway Atoll, you can go back to the Albatross slide. Midway Atoll is the place where most of them nest. So I don't know what the count is this year, but it's probably going to be something close to 500,000 chicks. We're seeing a lot more nest abandonment this year, which we'll talk about a little bit, but it could be less than that, but it'll still be in the hundreds of thousands of albatross chicks at Midway. That's their mothership. That's the place where most of them come from. On Kauai, the nesting numbers, last year we fledged 148 chicks. So we have a tiny, tiny percentage of the nesting Laysan albatross in the world. Oh, there's also, I left off, there's also a nesting colony in Guadalupe Island, Mexico. All the rest of them are in the Hawaii archipelago. Next slide, please. So here they nest near the Kilauea Point, 11 miles of coastline between Anahola and Princeville, and with a cluster right there at Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge. You see the lighthouse behind the bird here. They come back in November after they've been at sea for several months, flying solo. 90% of their lives are solo at sea. They're meant for solitude. They're meant for fasting. And they cover that whole area that you saw on the video. You saw that map covering all that whole North Pacific area, which is roughly 12 million square miles. That's 3 times the size of the whole US, including Alaska. So it's a huge space that they forage for food, if you could imagine. Then after foraging for months and months over that huge space, all of a sudden realizing it's time to reunite with your mate, and it's time to start the nesting season again. So if you were to have a GPS tracker on the back of an albatross, you would see them meandering all over that North Pacific area, but then it becomes time to come here and then to fly a straight line, direct line to the place where they were hatched and to the place where they will reunite with their mate. How they find this little tiny little space in that gigantic area is a mystical mystery. Seabird scientists are thinking now they do it by smell, that they memorize a smell map across the ocean. And so they find their way smell by smell back to, in this case, back to Kauai. Next slide. Also at Midway are black-footed albatross. The black-footed albatross are gorgeous birds, shades of gray, really beautiful birds. Don't nest here on Oahu. They are trying to get a colony started there because the black-footed albatross nest close to the ocean. At Midway, they nest right on the beach. And so they're the first ones whose nests will be destroyed with sea level surge, as well as sea level rise. You might remember the tsunami that happened in Japan back in 2011, I believe it was. That tsunami sent a 5-foot wave across the island of the Midway, 3 Midway islands, and took out 250,000 albatross chicks. So a full half of that class of 2011 away went those birds. It was a blessing that it happened in March instead of February. If it happened in February, we would have lost parents. All of them would have lost a parent as well, which would have been a devastating blow to the population. But there are probably 3 million of them in the world. They are still plentiful. The issues are getting more and more challenging for them. And as you saw in the film, because sea level rise is going to submerge Midway, they need somewhere else to go. So that's why every chick counts here at Kauai, because then those chicks can lead other birds back this way. Next slide, please. So the birds fly really well at night as well. They can sleep on the wing. They toggle back and forth between hemispheres of their brains to sleep, and they can see and hunt very well at night. One of the things that they're looking for in hunting is there's some bioluminescence that comes up around spawning squid. When they come to the surface, they let off this. They create the bioluminescence so that albatross can see them. And spawning squid is a smorgasbord for albatross. Somebody has their microphone on, just to let you know. Okay, you want to check your mute? Okay, next slide, please.
Oop. Sorry.
Spud ahead, go ahead, back.
There, whoops, there we are.
Okay, next.
I'm not on mute and I can't get on mute, so.
Okay, not you. There, yeah, okay. Okay. So the foraging range that you saw this slide in the film, the foraging range is that whole area that you see in light blue there, the whole North Pacific. So you can see there are waters that are not far from you. actually, where they forage. And if you went out on a pelagic trip, you might actually see them. You probably wouldn't see them from shore, but on a pelagic trip, they are seen sometimes from places like Monterey, Portland, Seattle, in British Columbia. So, and certainly from in areas around Alaska. So they're looking, if you can see on the left side, that's all the way over to Japan. On the upper right, upper left is Russia. Upper right, Alaska, huge area that they look for food. So you see where Kauai is and you see where Midway is. So that's about 1,200 miles northwest. And all those other little areas that you see in between are mostly submerged Hawaiian islands. But a whole bunch of them up there by Midway still have the top of the volcanic peak showing. And those are islands where seabirds nest. Next slide, please. So they come back in after foraging for all these months. They come back in November and flying that straight line, as I mentioned. And the pairs, the mated pairs, are very excited to see each other. They often will run to each other, eeping and chirping, and then they preen and they snuggle and they nap and they mate and they preen and they snuggle and they nap and they mate. They spend the night together. They sometimes spend as much as a couple of days together. And then what happens is that she will store the sperm in her body, in her reproductive tract. They'll both go back out to sea to catch up with food. And then when she has enough food to support a big egg, the length of a soda can, and her own health, then she will come back to Kauai, to the exact spot that they chose as a nest. She will release the sperm to herself, and within a day, she'll lay an egg right on the spot where she wanted to lay it. Next slide, please. The human beings here on Kauai, many human beings here on Kauai welcome them. The nene geese are native geese here, not so much. They will body slam them when they come down. They get used to having the island to themselves, not exactly to themselves, but not many other big birds on the ground. And so they get used to that. And when the albatross first come back, they give them a hard time, but they get used to it. Next slide, please. And then while those birds are just starting to lay their eggs and just starting their nesting season, some of the teenagers start coming in. And by that, I mean anybody who's between 5 and 9 years old or so. As I mentioned in the film, they don't touch ground for several years after they fledge. When they come back to the place where they hatched, then they start learning to dance. They start learning to flirt. And basically it's a singles bar for them for a few years when they're 5, 6, 7. They usually don't choose a mate till they're 8 or 9, and then will have their first egg after that, after the following season. But they really like cozying up to each other. Next slide, please. They mate. Albatross are not meant for perching. It's hard for them to do. The male will climb on the female's back and clench his toes to try to hang on. He's got to move his tail all the way to the side. She's got to move her tail all the way to the side. And then they've got to do what they call a cloaca kiss, which is the little tiny pinkish, it looks like about the size and shape of a pencil eraser. They have to touch those two parts, and that sperm has to be ready to jump in right now. Dude, go, it's time, you've touched that spot. And it looks for all the world like sex. They are humping and doing their best to procreate differently than you would see a songbird for whom sex is over in about a half second. These guys actually he stays mounted for about 60 seconds or so. And then I think she probably starts feeling a little compressed. He weighs about 8 pounds. She's not used to having anything on her back, so then she'll stand up and kind of toss him off. But the hope is that in that time, the sperm found its way to where it needed to go. Next slide, please. This is a video that we're going to skip the video because it's snagging so much. But this is a video of a bird actually laying an egg. What happens is that they droop their wings. That's how I imagine that they're starting to lay an egg. They droop their wings and then stand up, and then gradually the egg just kind of falls out. If you can imagine the cloaca being the size of a pencil eraser and a giant egg, it takes some doing to get it out. And it's kind of a shiny pink at first. Next slide, please. So then as they sit there waiting on their eggs, they will sit on their eggs for about 61 days. They won't walk an inch away from that nest. They'll stay right there. And what will happen is that they will, just a second, we got new messages. I'm just going to move this down so I can see them. And they will be in whole groups of birds dancing together, returning, dancing, and often very close to nests where they are sitting there for those 61 days, waiting for that egg to hatch. Govinda has asked, you mentioned the nene body slam the albatross, eventually they get used to it. Who does? The nene get more used to it. The albatross start realizing that they're bigger, and the albatross don't attack them, but they pretty much let them know that they're not going to take harassment anymore. So the nene kind of grumble and back off is what happens. But albatross are not a fighting animal by and large. They will fight a bird that comes to try to be too close to their chick, but by and large not. Okay, next slide, please. Sometimes they'll flirt with decoys. There's a story about a bird that actually chose a decoy for his mate for a couple of years, and then gave up. I had a lady in a presentation one time say, how can you say they're so smart if they mate with decoys? And I said, you know what? I mated with some pretty bad people too, and I'm smart. So I can't fault them. On we go. Next slide, please. So you see the birds that are sitting on the nests, the one that's in the center there and the one on our lower left are sitting on nests, and they almost look like they're in a state of reverie, almost like they're meditating. You can hear an om going on in the background, just sitting there in this stillness. And then there's all this frenetic activity around them where those other teenage birds, the teenage birds, are dancing and whinnying and mooing and clacking, and sometimes with great energy. But these birds just sit there quietly on their eggs, waiting for the moment and fasting the whole time. After the female lays the egg, the male comes and takes his turn, often for as long as a month, sitting on that egg himself, not leaving, not eating, he can drink rain if he can get a little bit, but basically he fasts and waits with great steadfastness. Next slide, please. That also is a video at Midway of showing a bird that's drinking rain, but we're going to not ask it to video for us because it seems to snag. But they sit there. I want you to see too, the rain, the kind of nest they have at Midway is just built out of sand. They pick up, and it's fine pieces of sand, pulverized coral. So they pick up these scoop up pieces of sand and then scatter them around themselves to fortify the nest. Next slide, please. So this is a video that you already saw. Let's see if this will play. So you see, she clacked at the human approaching with that clipboard, but not very aggressively, just a little snap, snap, like maybe you're too close. But then she didn't have a second of hesitation of accepting that adoptive egg. You took my baby and you gave me a new one. Okay, I'm cool with that. She just accepts it. And there she is talking. And then that E sound you heard, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. And that E sound you heard is an affection sound. It's the way they talk to their baby. So that was an affectionate sound to her adoptive egg that she just received. Next slide, please. Then they start hatching at about 61, 62 days. They first make a tiny little poke in the shell. It looks just like a little indentation in the shell. You don't even see a hole yet. And because there's an air sac inside the egg, you can hear them start chirping. So they will chirp to their parents and their parents back to them. If you're there and you chirp, the chick will chirp to you. And then it gradually starts, he or she gradually starts breaking the shell open. That's about the second day's worth of hole. And then when they get a big enough hole, they'll take their shoulders and push the egg apart so that it cracks open when it becomes unstable like that after having been broken. But the parents don't help. They'll talk, they'll touch, they'll encourage, but they don't help the egg breaking. Next slide, please. And then the parents stay with them for about 2.5 weeks, feeding them regularly, frequently small feedings like a human baby, giving them regurgitated squid oil. It looks like 3-in-1 oil, kind of a copperish greenish, very thick oil. It's very high caloric. If any of you ever want to gain weight, I recommend that you drink squid oil because these birds grow really quickly. And the parents will stay on top of them until they are about 2.5, 3 weeks old. But the main reason that they're able to leave them is because the chicks can thermoregulate, and the chicks can then actually control their own temperatures, then the parents can go. So they're really very little, no bigger than my fist. They're really very little when they get left all alone on the ground by themselves. So they're very vulnerable to feral cats, to loose dogs, and to pigs in particular.
We had a couple questions about the egg.
Okay.
One person wanted to know how do you know if an egg is infertile?
Okay, so we candle it. You put a little flashlight up against it, and the people that do the candling carry just a dark cloth with them that they put over their heads. It's like a portable dark room. So you put this cloth over your head, and so it's totally dark inside, and you shine that flashlight at one end of it, and you can see vessels, blood vessels, and an embryo inside a fertile egg.
Thank you. The other question had to do with, is that why they were removing the egg from that one albatross?
They remove the egg because it's infertile, right? And
Okay.
because we have a fertile egg to supply it. We don't do, that's only done on approved properties that the state wildlife people have approved of. This doesn't happen everywhere. But yes, that's an infertile egg that's being taken away and a fertile egg that's being provided. Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see one more in the chat. Can the albatross parents tell when their egg is fertile? We don't think so. The female pairs, you know it's a female pair because there are 2 eggs in the nest. Albatross, all species of albatross all over the world can only have 1 egg a year max. That's all they can do. So if there are 2 eggs in the nest, that means it's two females. Sometimes, well, most of the time, they kick out one of the egg. They either bury or kick out one of the eggs. And roughly half the time, if there's a fertile egg among those 2, roughly half the time it's the fertile egg that got kicked out. So we don't think that they can tell at least that early in the fertilization process, which is like in the first couple of weeks. They may be able to tell later. We don't know for sure. And somebody asked, do they source the fertile eggs from Midway? No, the eggs are very fragile. So Midway would be too far away. Midway is about as far from here as Seattle is to San Diego. So it's not a short flight. And the eggs, we just take them from the missile range, that's Navy base that's on the other side of the base. You may have noticed in the video, there was a shot of a Navy base. They get removed from there on the west side of Kauai because we don't want the albatross colliding with airplanes. It's never happened, but we don't want any pilots to come down and we don't want any birds to come down. So all those eggs are harvested from there and driven in a truck from there about 2 hours over to the North Shore nesting sites. Okay, next slide. And then they do what they call the guard phase, which they just hang out next to the chick. The chick will start squirming underneath the parent, like, "Mom, I'm too hot, get out, get off me." And the parents will, but they'll keep trying until the chick just doesn't let them anymore. And then when they're really lucky, they get to have an overlap with their mate. In other words, the bird that's leaving the chick will see the bird that's coming to feed the chick. So hopefully they have a moment of overlap, because mate for life, which is what albatross have the reputation of doing, mate for life means the equivalent of about 2 weeks a year together. So they really revel in the time that they do have. It's very, very short periods of time. Next slide, please. That's another guard phase picture where they just sometimes sit and stare at each other. I don't know if they're memorizing each other's look or each other's smell, but they sit and stare. It's really quite a wondrous thing to observe. They're very still and just sit, that the adult bird might be kind of rocking back and forth on the heels there, just kind of gradually moving like I am, just back and forth like this. And the chick is just watching the parent. Will stop to preen, will stop to, tug on it, like those needles that are hanging from the tree there. We call those ironwood here, or casuarina tree. They'll tug on those just like a puppy would tug on slippers, just for fun. But they need to be able to recognize each other in any colony, even if it's small. Next slide, please. We only have record of knowing any time in which a female-female pair hatched 2 eggs instead of 1. We think what happened in this situation, this was back in 2011 as well. The female had 2 fertile eggs, and the biologist said, well, let's just see what happens. In retrospect, I think we should have taken 1, because they can't raise 2 chicks. I don't think the decision wasn't mine, the decision was the biologist's, but I think that she wanted to see how they would handle that. We got lots of photographs of them handling it, but the chicks ultimately didn't survive. So there's a whole chapter of that in my book about Ola and Loa and how they did. But one of the questions that you would never otherwise have answered is, how do 2 albatross chicks behave together in a nest? Because there are never 2. And so they did, as anybody who knows albatross might guess they would do. They preened each other and they snuggled and they napped together in the most affectionate kind of poses. They're not like seabirds who kill the sibling so that one of them can live. They don't have that. They don't. There's never 2 in a nest, so they wouldn't have developed that behavior. Let's see. We got another one in the chat here. Oh, okay, never mind. Go ahead. Next slide, please. They're so artistic, everything about them is wonderful, and they even poop artistically. They do this kind of sundial around themselves, and never pooping in their own nest, even including when they are still just wobbly and wet and only hours old. Their first poop, they will lift their bottoms and shoot it outside their nest. So it's not, so they're not in a mess, and it's not a stinky kind of situation at all. They just shoot it, and sometimes in this great kind of sundial, and other times it's more like one direction. And I wonder if they're trying to learn directions, point directions somehow of which way their parents went. I one time set up a camera on a chick, and when I came back a couple of days later, all the poop was on the camera. It wasn't in a sundial. It was all straight at the camera. So you decide what that meant. Next slide, please. Then they get bigger and more exploratory. They get adorably cute, and they really fuzzy. They start walking around. They start building new nests. They start entertaining themselves, picking up things from the ground. They're very much like human toddlers, picking up things. They're very tactile, putting them in their mouths, just seeing what they taste like, what they feel like, dropping them and moving around. but they don't fraternize with each other. They don't play and have fun with each other. And the main reason, I think, is that they never want their parent to get confused about who to feed. When a parent comes and they might get a meal only once every 2 weeks or so, they don't want to lose an ounce of that meal. And so the parents, if there's another chick too close to their own chick, sometimes the parents will actually go and scold that other chick for being too close or being in the territory of that nest. They'll grab them by the head and shake them, make them squeal. But these chicks they get more and more adorable. Somebody said, if you go to Google Maps, Midway Island, and click on Street View, you could actually see the birds on the ground. Yeah, you can get a sense of I'm not sure how long ago those pictures were taken, but you can see the birds there at Midway during albatross season. Next slide, please. Then the chicks get bigger. They actually will preen their own parents, which is a Mother's Day present for these adults who are not seeing much of their own chicks, their own mates anymore. Chicks preening them is, I'm sure, welcome itch scratched. And they just so adore each other's company. It's really clear to see. Sometimes the parents come in and they skid to a halt and then run to their chick and feed for 10 minutes and then turn around and go right back. Who knows how many thousands of miles they took to get there and how many thousands of miles they're going to go cover next. Next slide, please. They don't know what a fence is. And so we have had circumstances where we had to put up fences, not separating chicks from their parents in general, although that's had to happen a couple of times. But they will try to shove themselves through rather than go over because they can see through it, and they can't really grok what a fence is. So sometimes that happens with the fledgling chicks too. If there's a fence in their way, they'll shove and shove and shove till they make their shoulders bloody trying to get through. So we try to prevent situations like this. There are lots of ways to do that. One of them is to put a piece of plywood over that fence so that they can't see through, and then they'll just easily fly to the side where the chick is. Next slide, please. So predators. One of the reasons you heard me mention in the film, one of the reasons that the albatross nest on Kauai and not on Maui and not on Hawaii Island, which you know is a big island, or Oahu, in any place except where there's a predator-proof fence, is because of mongoose. The Hawaiian Islands are covered with mongoose. They were brought here on purpose by sugarcane growers because they thought they'd get rid of rats. But it was probably the worst decision anybody's made related to Hawaii birds. Kauai got away with not having any mongoose, so we don't have any here, meaning the ground nesting birds have a greater chance. Both the water birds like the ducks and the geese and the stilts and coots, those folks all have a better chance because we don't have mongoose. Next slide. This is a cat that I trapped at an albatross colony. And what happened was that I moved the cat into the shade because it was in the sun. And the albatross walked right up to that cage and started just looking at the cat with great curiosity, not aggression, not distress, just curiosity. So it just gives you a sense of how the Hawaii birds never developed a sense of what a predator was because there weren't any. In Hawaii, not the seabirds, not the water birds, not the forest birds, none of them. We didn't have any raccoons or coyotes or anything to predate upon them. We only have one native land mammal, and that's a hoary bat. So they had nothing, they had no reason to develop fight or flight kind of behaviors. That's one of the reasons they're so vulnerable on the ground. Next slide, please. This was a bird that we rescued back in 2012. A pair of dogs broke into a colony and killed a bunch of albatross chicks. We were able to rescue 5 of them. And this was one chick that was being assessed in a rehab and Save Our Shearwaters area here in Kauai. That bird not only lived to fledge, actually that bird was shocky was head bit by the dog, was shocky. I carried that bird on my lap the whole way for an hour drive after rescuing, and she didn't move. She seemed like she might not survive. And then one night there was a big storm, and the next morning she woke up, and so she was named Stormy, and she actually came back at age 4, younger than most birds, and age 6 she raised her first chick, and normally they don't do that till 8 or 9. So she's a real success story for the rehab people. Next slide, please. Then when they get bigger, they get really goofy looking. I use Facebook for the purpose of talking about Kaua'i birds, in particular the albatross. Toward the end of the season, in the last month or so before they fledge, we have a little Moli hairdo, a fake hairdo contest, just to try to see how goofy they can get. Some of them, there are mohawks, there are Bozo the clown looks, there are these sort of mutton chop looks, all kinds of different looks that have become very amusing. Next slide. Here's one we call Lay Hulu, which is, hulu means feathers. So this bird looks like she's wearing a whole lay of feathers on her chest, just by the way it managed to distribute itself. Next slide. And by then the nene are just not really paying much attention to them. They coexist fine in the same fields. I think one of the reasons that the nene are so sensitive about the albatross coming in when they do in November is that's nene nesting season. So the males in particular are very sensitive about anything else coming near to their eggs and their mates. Next slide, please. They even nest right here on golf courses, inches away from golfers themselves. The golf course maintenance people will mow around them when they're young, but the bigger they get, the farther they wander. So you can't exactly tell where to mow, but the golf course maintenance people are very aware of the albatross and don't ever cause them harm. They can tolerate a lot of loud noise. They nest in neighborhoods here where headlights come straight at them and kids skateboard right past them, and they don't get disturbed by it. Somebody said, can you tell them apart? Is that right? Let's see what we got. Can you tell the sexes apart? Not really. The feathering is identical. The males are sometimes a little bit bigger and sometimes have a little bit more of a triangular head. But you can't really tell them apart without doing DNA testing on their feathers. Or if you see an egg coming out of the body, then that's usually a girl. At least that's what they taught me in nursing school. Maybe it's still true. Otherwise, or if you can't even tell by looking at when they're copulating, you can't even tell for sure because the female pairs also have sex. So you can't really tell by who's on top. You can only tell by, you can tell a little bit by size, but not 100% guaranteed. And you can tell a little bit, and you can tell certainly if it's a female because of the egg. And the other question is, at what age are the Moli banded, and when, and will the webcam ever return? The Moli are banded in May when they're about 5 months old or so. They're gonna, or sometimes early June. They have to be big enough, their legs have to be strong enough, and the legs just, they have to be large enough to be able to handle the band. They get a plastic band on one leg and a metal band on the other leg. Good banders, the whole thing takes only about 20 seconds or so. The webcam, we would live streamed a webcam for 5 years. What I tell people is that it takes a whole lot of stars to align to make it possible for there to be a live streaming webcam. So don't know if those stars are going to align again, but there's not a current plan for that to happen. We were lucky to have had it for 5 years. Next slide, please. So before the chicks fly, they regurgitate a bolus. And the dark things there that you see, the dark shiny things that you see there are squid beaks. Squid beaks are, you remember those kind of black shiny corners we used to put in scrapbooks to hold the pictures in place? They look sort of like that. They're black and shiny, and they're too sharp to swallow. So albatross are pre-programmed to puke out stuff they can't digest. You've all seen owl pellets too, with stuff they can't digest, the fur and the bones and things. And there's always plastic, almost always plastic in the albatross boluses these days. I saw one last year that had none in it, which was the first one I'd ever seen, I think, in the whole time I've been monitoring the birds. Sometimes there's a whole lot of plastic, more plastic than you would really think they could survive with. But the chicks do throw them up. Hopefully what's left in their stomach is food and not something indigestible. But we collect those so school children can dissect them and learn about it. Next slide, please. That's a whole collection of stuff from several birds. You can see one of the common things is bottle caps. I'm dismayed to see that with all of our water issues and all the problems that we've had during COVID, that there's probably a lot more water bottles being bought these days. Boy, I hope we can wean ourselves off of that habit, because they're going to end up in the ocean, a lot of them, and they don't go away ever. So you see all these bottle caps that these chicks are puking up. That long piece that you see there is an unidentified kind of piece of PVC. It's the length of a toothbrush or so. I saw that parent regurgitate that up. It missed the chick and fell on the ground, fortunately, but they are consuming lots of plastic these days. Let me see what that next chat is. What was the name of the birds that were killed by eating all the plastic? There was a movie 3 or 4 years ago. Chris Jordan made a film called Midway, when he filmed a whole bunch of albatross chicks who had died at Midway from plastic in their stomach. He showed a lot of birds that were dissected or had died there, and you could see as they kind of their bodies sort of decomposed, you could see the plastic. Is that the one? I don't know if that's the one you mean, but that's the one. That's about the right length of time. Chris Jordan made a film. You could look him up. You could Google Chris Jordan Midway film and you'd be able to see that. This slide is also a video. Let's see if we can get it to work. This is a double fledge. There goes one. It goes right there at the corner of your eye. There you go. So two of them, two birds fledged at once. It's the only time that we actually see the chicks commingle. I told you they didn't hang out with each other, but in that last week or so before they fledge, something happens and they start sort of doing a monkey see, monkey do thing where they're flapping, they flap together and they watch each other and they sort of, it's like they're guessing, and do you think this is a good spot to jump off? Do you think this might be a good spot? So they do hang out together. Next slide, please, at that very end. That's a slide of my next door neighbor and I were taking a taxidermied bird back to the Kilauea Point refuge, and I had used that bird as a presentation that I'd given at the library here, and Janine was putting on her makeup, so I thought it was a cool picture. Next slide, please. That's the end. Okay, good. So let's hear more questions. Any other thoughts you have? It's now 6:30. So I think we're getting to the time I'm supposed to be done. So any other questions, comments, concerns, observations, anything you want to share is fine.
There was a question in the chat about whether female to female pairings were more common in albatross than in other birds.
You know, it's the only population of birds, only species of birds that I've heard about them in the kind of percentage that they have them. I don't know why that is. Some biologists feel like it's because here in Kauai, at least the females outnumber the males. And so they think that it's a matter of finding a mate, and there's not enough boys, so a girl's fine too. I don't think that's the only answer. I'm a female nester myself, and I don't think it's the only answer. I think it's good to watch them and observe them and just, learn our own impressions about what's happening. They're just as good a parents as the male-female pairs, as you might imagine. So who knows?
Yeah.
It's also possible, that the ocean has a lot of hormone disruptors in it now. So it's also possible that their hormones are changing. There are animals now that are more hermaphroditic, right? And we certainly hear a lot more about people feeling like humans feeling like they are not in the right body, the correct body for their gender. So, gosh, what is all that about? Is it just that we know it more than we used to, or is it something we're consuming, or is it something that we know that we didn't know? I think it's probably multifaceted.
Another question was, what are the decoys for?
The decoys are to draw them to a safe place. The places that you saw decoys were places that were fenced in from pigs and dogs. And we want them to go, and that had neighboring property that weren't safe. So we want to draw them to a place where they feel like here they can nest in peace and raise their babies in safety. We also use sound devices for that. The vocalization units playing albatross sounds for that reason.
And people were asking whether when they're out at sea, do they fly all the time, or do they land on the water and float at all?
They do land on the water. They have to land on the water to find food, of course. So they do that. They do float some. An interesting story. The only organization that's ever been able to keep an albatross in captivity is the Monterey Aquarium. They have 2 female birds there in captivity, both of which would not survive in the wild because they have irreparable wing injuries. Both those birds were enormously reluctant to get in the water. Very reluctant to get in the water. I haven't even heard whether the second one has been convinced yet. But the first one took months and months to get in the water. And when that happened, actually what they did was they put food in the water, they put toys in the water, they put her on a cart and pushed her to the penguin exhibit to show her birds get in water. And still, she wouldn't get in the water. And finally, the thing that got her in the water was a mirror. So the aviculturalist that raised those birds, that entertains those birds, number one, says to me that they're corvid smart, thinks they're as smart as crows, number one. And number two, she felt like it was probably because they do have a fear of sharks. Sharks are their only predator. They search such a huge expanse of ocean that it's not very common for them to see sharks, but at Midway, the chicks certainly see sharks because they come around during fledging time. So maybe that's why, I don't know. What now are they? And they also do have to molt. So sometimes they're less airborne than others, but they molt gradually, not all at once. Like the nene do, our geese molt all at once and they can't fly for a few weeks. The albatross can always fly.
People were wondering how the birds are protected from ground predators on Kauai.
So the fences keep out dogs and pigs. A fence like you saw, that bird trying to push itself through, that'll keep out a dog and a pig. It doesn't hold away a cat. And the feral cat predation has gotten worse here in these last couple of years. So let me just tell you what I think about no-kill shelters here. That no-kill shelters, which is some organizations have the goal that all shelters in the United States will be no-kill shelters by 2025. I could not disagree with that more. The problem is that there's lots more killing that happens because of no-kill shelters. It just doesn't happen inside the walls of the shelter. So that means if you live on Kauai and you trap a feral cat that's injured, that's beating up your cat, that is got skin disease and is limping, the no-kill shelter will not take that bird, take that cat. So what do? You really only have three choices. You can either euthanize it yourself, which may or may not be humane. You could pay a vet, and a lot of people can't afford to do that. Or the third thing is you could go release it somewhere else. So here in the Hawaiian Islands, we probably have 500,000 feral cats. And we just had a hearing in the county council yesterday. And thank you for the folks here on the screen who wrote letters about that. We're trying to get some control over it. And the pet food industry is very opposed to that. And they will give lots of money to the people who help fight that. So the feral cats are an issue everywhere, but we don't have a cold winter. We don't have predators for feral cats. They can multiply very quickly, and trap neuter release doesn't do anything to put a dent in their population. And they have to still hunt. A sterilized cat still has to hunt. And pigs have gotten on to albatross as being food. So in places where pigs can get in, they kill the parents and the chick. And they also have learned to bump the parent off the egg and just eat the egg.
Wow.
So pigs and dogs need controlling, but there also are invasive barn owls here. Not many of them, but they will also eat baby birds and small seabirds here.
Okay. More questions, a lot of questions in the chat for you.
Okay, good.
What's the time frame for the submerging of Midway?
Wow, that depends on who you ask. If you, some people say not till the end of century, but if you believe the stories that you're reading about the Doomsday Glacier, we're going to have a 3 to 5 foot sea level rise in 5 years from now.
Wow.
So we don't know. I don't think we know. We're entering a phase that we don't really know enough of how to predict how quickly sea level is going to rise.
Do you think it's realistic that Kauai can replace the nesting territory of Midland?
Of Midway?
Yeah, of Midway, I'm sorry.
They have enough land. There are hundreds of acres that are open for them. Whether they'll find their way here and choose it here, I don't know. But we have lots of space for them. I don't know if we have enough space for 500,000 nests, but I think we probably do if they decide to come this way. That's the hope, that and if they start crowding out those places, hopefully we'll have more places to open up for them.
Couple questions about feeding. One was with each parent away hunting independently, when the chick is left alone, is there any regularity in which the time in which the parents return, or the rate at which they return with food?
It all depends on how long it takes them to find enough food. So sometimes chicks will wait on, 3 weeks without a meal. Hopefully, with experienced parents, hopefully what happens is that their trip to find food is about 2 weeks long. So hopefully what happens is they stagger each other. So then that way a chick would get a meal every week. That's the hope.
Okay.
But it's getting harder for them to find enough food now. And so I don't know, you never know for sure when they're coming back. I also want to answer a question here that says, since they mate for life, how do female pairs get pregnant? They will, well, let me just say mate for life with albatross doesn't mean the same thing as it means to humans. When we say mate for life, we mean, you don't sleep with anybody else. The albatross mate for life means that you and I are committed to raising a chick. But it doesn't mean that one bird isn't going to go off in the bushes with another bird for 60 seconds. So about 10 to 15% of the female birds, of the female pairs have a fertile egg because they got a sperm donor. But that male does not participate in the raising of that chick. He just mates with her and then leaves. Can you tell us more about how they feed? The parents, if you're talking about feeding the chicks, the parents regurgitate what they have in they have 2 stomachs. So they regurgitate what's in their upper stomach to the chick. If you mean more about how the adults feed, they land on the surface of the ocean and they can't dive for food. They pluck out food. They can bob for food. So they're picking out squid that are on the surface of the ocean, and flying fish will fly by. They can grab them as they're going by. They can strip kelp that's covered with flying fish eggs. That's good food for them too. How realistic do you think it is, as hoped in the movie script, that Kauai can replace? Oh, I think you brought that up with Midway. You know, I don't know anything about what's realistic anymore, to be honest with you. I think we're all guessing a lot these days about what's our lives are going to be like. And all we're doing here is opening up the option for them. They may not choose to come here. I don't know, but they know how to find here, and 1,000 miles away from their mothership is not far for an albatross. That's like you and I crossing the street, you know, so it's close enough for them to come here, to choose here if they want to. But who knows? I mean, what would you do if you came home and your house was completely submerged in water? You know, maybe their choices are going to be as varied as our choices would be. I really don't know. Nobody knows for sure.
Couple more questions in chat.
Mm-hmm.
Have you visited the Royal Albatross Center in New Zealand?
No, I haven't. I would love to. That's the Royal Albatross. Those birds have a nearly 12-foot wingspan. They're the largest flying bird in the world. The Laysan Albatross are miniature compared to them. Laysan Albatross only 6.5-foot wingspan. Those kids, I think, are 11.5-foot wingspan. They're glorious birds. But the Cornell Lab of Ornithology does have a live streaming camera on an albatross nest now in New Zealand for the second year or third year, I think, a live streaming camera on an albatross chick. So you can see a live streaming albatross camera. It's just not here on Kauai.
There's a comment here about long line fishing, and that's a danger to albatross,
right?
And that the US and Australia are using excluder devices that seem to be effective. What about elsewhere in the range where they're foraging?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. You know, there are some really wonderful inventions to prevent albatross from going after the bait. What they do is they go after the bait that's on a long line. Long line means miles and miles and miles of hooks after following a boat that they come off a big reel, and so they're baited. And so while the bait is shallow, the albatross will bob to get the bait, and then they get caught on the hook. So there are a number of excluder devices to keep that from happening. But the ocean is a huge place, and there's a whole lot of illegal fisheries, and there's a lot of places in the ocean that are policed by no one. So here in Hawaii, I get notifications from NOAA whenever a bird has been killed in the longline fishing industry, but they only have observers on something like 10 or 15% of the boats. So, and it takes them a month to get back to report having killed an albatross. So I'm hoping the fishing industry gets better at that, because they don't want birds either. I mean, they don't want to catch birds either, and things that they don't need on their lines. But it needs to be something that a lot of people are working on. It needs to be something that's cheap and inexpensive and easy to deploy for the fishery industry.
There was a question about how you're attracting them to Kauai.
How we're tracking them? I'm sorry, I don't know what
how
you mean.
You are attracting, how you are getting them to come to.
They come here on their own by and large, but we do have a few decoys here and there, not many, a few decoys here and there. Mostly what they're interested in is each other. So if they fly by and see a bunch of their own selves on the ground, they'll come down to check it out.
Okay. And then the birds that are on Kauai, and then there's birds on Midways, do you track whether the Kauai birds stay on Kauai and the Midway birds stay, or do some Midway birds already come to Kauai to nest?
Well, most of the Midway birds are never banded. When they have 500,000 chicks, They and they have, there's on Midway, there are 50 human beings, and 25 of them are Fish and Wildlife Service, and 25 of them are people cooking, are Thai nationals who are cooking the food and doing maintenance. So the 25 Fish and Wildlife people have nowhere near enough personnel to band 500,000 chicks. So they band little plots of them. They plan, you know, they have plots that they band and they check every season so they can extrapolate the data on guessing how many of them are returning, the survivorship data. Here in Kauai, on the private lands, all of the chicks get banded. And so we know them when they come back. We know who they are when they come back.
I think the last question I saw was, how, see if I have to look at it again, I'm sorry. I lost my track here. Where did I see that?
Somebody asked me if I've ever eaten an albatross egg and how is it? No. The only time I ever see an albatross egg is one that's got, it's either infertile and been abandoned, or it's fertile and been abandoned, and therefore it has a dead chick inside. Whenever they've broken open, they smell fishy and not at all appealing to me. It's never occurred to me to eat an albatross egg.
Here's the question I was going to ask you was,
okay.
There was a question about whether there are adult albatrosses who don't mate or raise a chick at all.
You know, we wouldn't really know that. I imagine we wouldn't really know that because we see these, if they're unbanded, you know, all you see is a bunch of unbanded birds coming and going, and you don't know one from the other. And that's going to be the majority of birds from Midway. So I don't know that question is answerable really. I assume that there's going to be somebody from time to time. What I can tell you is about the behavior of birds after a chick has died or a mate has been killed. We've seen birds wait years and years to choose a mate again after their mate is killed, and actually to relocate, to move from the place where they nested before and go to a new place if there's been a trauma there. I've seen birds lose their mate, and I've seen a female bird who, well, let me describe it better. So there's a pair that were mated, they broke up, they divorced. They both picked new mates. So this male and female over here are mates, this male and female over here are mates. This female, her mate doesn't come back 1 year. So we assume he's died at sea. So now she's single and her mate is still with his second wife. So what does she do? She moves in, she doesn't leave, she moves in with her ex-husband and her ex and his second wife. And they were a threesome for several years. Then that she separated, then this mate didn't come home, and now these two are back together. So, and they didn't wait at all long. After this mate didn't come back, these two got together again after very short order. So, but we do have records of birds waiting years and years to mate again, to choose a mate again. The two that Kalama's moms at the end of that season before Kalama fledged, one of those females was killed on longline fishing. One of Kalama's moms was killed on longline fishing. Sad as heck. And I just last week saw the other mom, Mahialani. She doesn't go back to the place where her mate didn't reappear. She came for a couple of years and waited and waited. That mate didn't come back. And so now she goes to other properties, and I see her from time to time, but she's not chosen a mate again. And that chick fledged in 2018.
Wow.
So, you know, we'll see what she does this year, but she's not nesting in 2022. So that's been at least 4 years now since she lost her mate. So I don't know. There's often a question about whether there are male-male pairs too. And again, we really wouldn't know because there wouldn't be a nest, which means that they would be out at sea together, or they might be here dancing and whinnying and mooing together and mating together, but there would never be a nest. So we wouldn't really know. We wouldn't be able to keep track of them. But why not?
No.
Let's see what relates to Chickasaw. Can one see albatross if they visit Kauai? Yes, on Kauai, there are, if you Kilauea Point, where that lighthouse is, you can see albatross in flight right at eye level. They fly right by you during season. And there are places where they nest on the ground where you can see a few. You can't go in the big colonies, and the private land colonies are private. They're sanctuaries for people as well as for birds, and but there are places where you can see a nesting albatross. Yeah.
What is the best time of year for that?
The birds come back. It depends on what works for you, but I think the best time of year to come is February or March, because in February the chicks have hatched. All of them hatched by Valentine's Day. So, and the parents are still with them for the first couple of weeks. So the latter part of February is when the birds, the parents are still with the chicks, and the teenagers are here too. So it's kind of the most dynamic time is in February, early March, late February, early March. But the season lasts all the way from Thanksgiving all the way to 4th of July, really.
Another question is, how do you recognize individual birds?
You can really only tell by the band on the leg. They all look so much alike. So the unbanded birds, you can't really tell them apart unless they have some other kind of significant indicator. Like there was a bird that was blinded in one eye, so I always knew it was her. She had a pox as a chick probably and lost her vision, but otherwise you can't really tell without the bands. That's why the banding is so important.
One other question is that I know that you do some bird guiding.
Yeah.
And where do you like to take people if they would come with you?
I take them 3 places. I take them into the Honolulu Refuge to see the endangered water birds. So the Hawaiian duck and stilt and coot, moorhen and all those. We try to catch all 5 of those species. And then I take them to see a few nesting albatross, albatross nests in private yards. And then we go to Kilauea Point to see seabirds and see, we see albatross at a distance there, and then we see them up close in flight. Because you're not complete until you've seen an albatross in flight. They're really poetry in motion. They hardly flap. You know, they can go, a scientist put a camera on the back of an albatross and documented 7 whole days without a single wing beat. Wow. You know, they glide. It's called dynamic soaring, the way they fly. And they when they first take off from the cliff, they lock their wings like a switchblade, and then they just use it to glide over the whole Pacific with occasional flapping. But there's 0 calorie flying. That's why they can fast for so long.
Amazing.
You know the gender of banded birds. With the gender of banded birds, we only know if we pull a feather from them. So with the chicks, we do that on a number of the chicks, especially on private lands where the people would like to know. We'll pluck a little feather from the 2 feathers, little downy feathers from the chicks. And then I send them to a lab in Florida, and they can tell us what gender they are. But that's the only way you can tell for sure. That and seeing the egg come out of the body later, 10 years later. But you can't tell by looking.
Well, I think they may have run out of questions, Hob.
Okay. Somebody, Dorothy, thank you. Mahalo for your presentation, your book, your film, and your inspiration. Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, it was wonderful. I've seen your little video now 4 times, and I just love it because you can hear them talk and hear the clack and just really,
you can hear them.
Yeah.
And 80 of you or 79 of you are still left standing. Way to go.
Yeah, isn't that great? And everybody that's still on, take yourself off of mute and put your video back on so that we can wave at her and tell her how wonderful
it
was tonight. I mean, this was a really special program.
Yeah, very, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being so attentive and showing up. This is the 150th time I've heard Hob talk, and it's always something new. That's a friend who loves me.
And Jane Stern said,
This woman's a falling asleep.
Thank you, Jane.
50th time I've heard Hob talk, and
People
there's
can
always
hear us.
something new.
I'm ready to leave the meeting.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Marcia.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope to see you in person someday over there.
Yeah,
Go
definitely.
on.
I hope so too.
Well, we'll come and
Thanks
load
so
the
much.
island in February, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you come in February, I'll see you. I'll see you too.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Hey.
Bye.
Thank
Ready
you
to
so
leave?
much.
I'm ready to leave. I'm leaving the meeting.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, Hob.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming.
Well, it's just a good thing I walked in when I did.
Yeah, thank
you. Oh, gosh. Well.